My name is Ellie Morgan, 26 years old, and every morning at 5 a.m. I tie on my faded apron at my grandfather's diner while my brother Mason cruises by in his shiny black SUV. He always slows down just enough to smirk at me through tinted windows. Harvard Law versus community college dropout serving pancakes. But what Mason doesn't understand about success would fill volumes. And despite his mockery, I stand tall. This diner means everything to my grandfather, which means it means everything to me. Before I dive into my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let's talk about what family truly means. Westridge isn't the kind of town that makes it onto postcards. It's small enough that everyone knows everyone's business, but big enough that you can occasionally surprise people. The main street cuts through downtown like a lazy river lined with brick buildings that have seen better days but still maintain a certain charm that newer developments just can't replicate. Right in the heart of it all stands Morgan's Diner, a local institution that's been serving the best pancakes and coffee in 3 counties for 50 years. The chrome-edged building with its red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floor feels like stepping back in time. The bell above the door still jingles the same way it did when my grandfather, Harold Morgan, hung it on opening day in 1973. Grandpa Harold wasn't always a diner owner. He started out in insurance, worked his way up to regional manager, and was on track for an executive position when he decided corporate life wasn't for him. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind when he took his savings and bought the rundown building that would become Morgan's. But Grandpa always had vision where others saw problems. A good meal brings people together, he'd tell me, while flipping pancakes when I was little. And people who come together can accomplish anything. 2 years ago, Grandpa's right hand suddenly stopped working mid-pour coffee, spilling across the counter as his words slurred and his face drooped. The stroke hit him hard and fast. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive, but recovery would be long and uncertain. His once precise movements became halting and stiff, his booming voice now softer and sometimes struggling to find the right words. But his mind remained sharp as ever, especially when it came to his diner. Not selling were his first clear words in the hospital. Never selling. I'd just finished my English literature degree at State University with plans to apply for teaching positions. I'd been living in an apartment near campus with dreams of staying in the city, maybe eventually earning a master's degree. But when Grandpa came home from the hospital unsteady on his feet and struggling to button his own shirt, those plans suddenly felt small and selfish. So I came home. At first, I told myself it would be temporary, just until Grandpa got back on his feet. I'd manage the diner for a few months, then resume my life. That was 2 years ago. The teaching applications sit in a folder on my laptop, occasionally updated but rarely sent. Now, my days start before dawn, helping Grandpa shower and dress. He insists on coming to the diner every day, sitting at the corner booth where he can survey his kingdom. I handle everything else, ordering supplies, managing the staff, doing the accounts waiting tables when we're short-handed, which is often. The work is exhausting and endless, but there's satisfaction in keeping this place and my grandfather going. My brother Mason has a different perspective. While I was helping Grandpa at the diner during high school and attending community college part-time, before transferring to State Mason, was collecting accolades and scholarships. He graduated top of his class and went straight to Harvard Law School, where he continued to excel. Now, at 32, he's a junior partner at Harrington and Bell, a prestigious Boston firm that recently decided to open a branch office in our region. Mason volunteered to relocate and head up the new office, a move that surprised me since he'd always talked about never coming back to our backward little town. Now, he lives in the new development on the hill in a house with columns and a circular driveway where he parks his black SUV that costs more than I'd make in 3 years of waiting tables. He's got the designer suits, the expensive haircuts, and the constant air of someone who's escaped and done better than his origins and wants everyone to know it. Last month, I received another rejection letter for a teaching position I'd applied for at Westridge High. While your qualifications are impressive, we've selected a candidate with more classroom experience, it read. I'd folded it into a tiny square and shoved it into my apron pocket, determined not to let it ruin my day. But when Mason stopped by the diner that afternoon, ordering a black coffee to go while commenting on how the place really needed updating, the letter seemed to burn in my pocket. Still playing waitress, huh? He'd ask, dropping a $5 bill for a $2 coffee and telling me to keep the change like I was a charity case. What he didn't see was how Mrs. Peterson, our oldest regular customer, had held my hand that morning after I helped her to her usual booth, or how the high school debate team that gathered here after school had asked for my help with their Shakespeare interpretations. He didn't see that the diner wasn't just a business, it was the beating heart of Westridge, where celebrations happened over pie, where problems were solved over endless cups of coffee, and where nobody was ever truly alone. My alarm goes off at 4:30 a.m., a jarring intrusion into what feels like minutes of sleep. I silence it quickly so it won't wake Grandpa in the next room, though most days he's already stirring. His internal clock still runs on diner time after 50 years. By 4:45, I'm helping him navigate the bathroom routine. The stroke left his right side weakened, making simple tasks like buttoning shirts and tying shoes into frustrating challenges. He never complains, but I see the flash of frustration in his eyes when his fingers won't cooperate. "I've got it," he'll insist, even as he struggles. Pride is a Morgan family trait, for better or worse. By 5:15, we're in my rusted-out Honda Civic heading to the diner. Grandpa clutches a thermos of coffee I've made at home, saving us precious minutes at opening. The streets of Westridge are empty, except for the occasional delivery truck. Sometimes there's a beautiful stillness to this hour when the world feels full of potential. At the diner, I unlock the front door while Grandpa makes his way slowly to the booth in the corner that everyone knows is reserved for him. My first tasks are automatic turn on the lights, start the industrial coffee machines, preheat the grills, check the prep work done the night before. By 5:45, Denise arrives through the back door, her gray hair already secured in a hairnet, ready to take over the kitchen. She's been cooking at Morgan's for 30 years and knows every recipe by heart. "Morning, sweetie," she calls, hanging her purse in the tiny office. "How's he doing today?" We have this exchange every morning, a comforting ritual. Denise was here through my childhood, giving me cookies when I'd visit after school, and she was here when my parents moved to Arizona for Dad's job, leaving me to finish high school with Grandpa because I refused to leave. She's more family than employee. By 6:00 a.m., Tyler, our dishwasher and busboy, arrives. He's 19, saving for community college classes one semester at a time. I see myself in him, sometimes determined but stretched thin by circumstance. Rebecca joins us at 6:30 for the morning rush, her 5-year-old daughter's lunch packed and ready for the neighbor who watches her until school. We open at 6:00 and the regulars start trickling in: construction workers, fueling up before their shifts, nurses coming off the night rotation at County General, and retired folks who wake with the sun and crave connection more than breakfast. I move between tables with coffee pot in hand, taking orders, delivering plates, making small talk. My feet ache by 8:00 a.m., but that's when I take a brief break to help Grandpa with his breakfast, cutting his pancakes into manageable bites when his coordination fails him. At 8:30 sharp like clockwork, Mason's black SUV cruises past the diner's large front windows. Some days he doesn't stop. Some days he does, always with some critical comment disguised as concern. Today is a stopping day. The bell jingles and Mason walks in wearing a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than our monthly utility bill. He nods to Grandpa before sliding onto a counter stool near where I'm totaling a customer's check. "Morning, Ellie," he says, setting his smartphone face up on the counter, where I can see the constant stream of notifications. "Just coffee today. Meeting with the Westridge Development Board in 30. As I pour his coffee, he surveys the diner with the appraising eye of someone calculating value and finding it wanting. Place is looking tired, don't you think? Those booths were ancient when we were kids. They have character eye counter sliding his coffee across the counter. People like the vintage feel. Mason snorts softly. People also like modern amenities and buildings that meet current codes. "Have you looked at the wiring in this place lately, or the foundation?" Before I can respond, he pivots. "You know, I ran into Dr. Garcia from the community college yesterday. She mentioned they're looking for an English composition adjunct. Might be good for you, you know, a real job using your degree instead of." He gestures vaguely at my apron. The way he says this makes my job sound like a personal failure rather than a choice made from love and duty. I bite back a sharp retort because Grandpa is watching from his booth and conflict upsets him. "I have a real job," I say instead, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "Several, actually." Mason sips his coffee and checks his watch, a Swiss timepiece that gleams on his wrist. "Just looking out for you, sis. You're still young. Don't want to wake up at 40 and wonder where your life went. Sunday dinners at Grandpa's house are a tradition that survived the stroke, though now I do the cooking instead of him. Mason arrives with expensive wine he knows Grandpa can't drink with his medication, and proceeds to dominate the conversation with stories about his important cases and connections. Senator Williams and I were just discussing the regional economic development plan, he'll say, while passing the potatoes. Or Judge Cahill invited me to join his golf club. Meanwhile, my contributions keeping a 50-year business afloat, managing employees caring for our grandfather, are minimized to playing restaurant. Last Sunday, after Mason described his new boat at length, Grandpa asked him if he was happy. The question landed like a rock in still water. Mason blinked, momentarily derailed. Of course, I'm happy, he'd answered, but something flickered behind his eyes, doubt or defense, I couldn't tell which. Later, when Mason had gone, Grandpa took my hand in his less steady one and said, "Different kinds of success, Ellie girl. Remember that." The following week brought another disappointment. Westridge Elementary had a last-minute opening for a long-term substitute position that could potentially lead to permanent placement. The interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Tuesday, a slow time at the diner when I could usually step away. I'd prepared my portfolio, chosen a professional outfit that had been gathering dust in my closet, and even practiced interview questions with Rebecca during a slow breakfast service. I was just about to leave when the ancient pipe beneath the dishwashing station burst, sending water flooding across the kitchen floor. Tyler stood helpless amongst the rising water, mop in hand, like a useless scepter. Denise had already called every plumber in town, but the earliest anyone could come was the following morning. I looked at the clock, 1:40 p.m. The school was a 15-minute drive away. I looked at the water at Grandpa, watching worriedly from his booth at the afternoon, regulars starting to arrive. I called the school and canceled the interview. By the time the water was contained and a temporary fix implemented, the position had been filled. The following Monday started like any other early alarm, helping Grandpa opening procedures. I was restocking sugar packets at the counter when the bell jingled. Instead of a customer, a stern-faced man in a short-sleeved button-up entered, clipboard in hand. "Health inspector," he announced, flashing his ID. "Routine inspection." My stomach dropped. We'd had inspections before, of course, but not since I'd taken over management, and not since certain repairs had been postponed due to budget constraints. "Of course," I said, trying to sound confident. "Let me just inform our cook." Denise's eyes widened at the news, but she squared her shoulders. "We run a clean kitchen." She assured me, though, we both knew about the temperamental refrigerator, the cracked tile near the prep station, and the ventilation system that didn't quite meet current codes. The next 2 hours were excruciating. Mr. Patterson, the inspector, methodically examined every corner of the diner, making notes and taking photos with his department-issued tablet. His expression revealed nothing, but the growing list on his clipboard told its own story. Grandpa watched from his booth, uncharacteristically quiet. I kept serving customers, smiling through my anxiety, while catching glimpses of the inspection in progress. Finally, Mr. Patterson called me to the kitchen. "Miss Morgan," he began, flipping through his notes, "I've identified several violations that need immediate attention." The list was longer than I'd feared. The refrigeration unit wasn't maintaining proper temperature consistently. 3 floor tiles were cracked, creating potential bacterial traps. The ventilation system needed upgrading, the dish sanitizer wasn't reaching required heat levels, and there were electrical issues that posed safety hazards. "You'll need to address these issues within 30 days, or I'll have no choice but to shut down operations until they're resolved," he concluded, handing me the official notice. After he left, I sank onto a stool, staring at the estimated costs I'd jotted beside each item. The total came to just over $15,000, money we simply didn't have. The diner was getting by, but profit margins were thin, and we had no emergency fund left after Grandpa's medical bills. Denise squeezed my shoulder. "We'll figure it out, honey." But the worry lines around her eyes told a different story. Tyler and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances. Their livelihoods were at stake, too. When I showed the notice to Grandpa, his hand trembled more than usual. The equipment fund, he suggested, referring to the savings account he'd maintained for major replacements. "We used that for your medical expenses," I reminded him gently. "Remember the specialist in Boston?" His face fell, and he suddenly looked every one of his 78 years. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I've become a burden to you." "No, Grandpa," I insisted, kneeling beside his booth. "Never that. We'll figure this out." But how a bank loan was unlikely given the diner's financials. My own credit was maxed out from helping with Grandpa's care. There was only one person I knew who might have access to that kind of money. I found Mason in his downtown office surrounded by gleaming wood and leather furniture that screamed success. His receptionist had tried to schedule me for the following week, but I'd walked past her desk with the determination of someone with nothing to lose. "This is a surprise," he said, not bothering to stand when I entered. "I usually require appointments, but I suppose family gets special privileges." I explained the situation, laying out the inspection report and the quoted repairs. "I need a loan," I concluded. $15,000. I can pay you back with interest over the next 2 years. I'd rehearsed terms that seemed businesslike and reasonable. I'd even prepared a written agreement. Mason leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. Then he laughed, actually laughed, and my heart sank. "Oh, Ellie," he said, his voice, a mix of condescension and what sounded almost like pity. "This might be the universe telling you it's time to let go. That diner is a relic. It's been failing for years." "It's not failing," I protested. "It's stable. We just need—" "What you need," he interrupted, "is to recognize a dying business when you see one. Look, I didn't want to tell you this way, but since you're here," he pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it toward me. Inside were glossy renderings of a modern shopping and dining complex. The proposed location was unmistakably the current site of Morgan's Diner and the 2 adjacent buildings. Westridge Commons, Mason announced with the pride of a parent. "Retail dining office space. I've been working with Horizon developers for months. They're prepared to make Grandpa a very generous offer for the property well above market value." I stared at him, the betrayal stealing my breath. "You've been planning this, while watching me kill myself trying to keep the diner going." "I've been trying to secure our grandfather's future," Mason countered. "That property is the only real asset he has. This deal would set him up comfortably for the rest of his life with plenty left over for both of us. You could finish your education, get a real career. The diner is his life," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "And you're working with developers behind our back." "I'm representing their interests professionally," Mason corrected, straightening his tie. "And looking out for our family personally. That diner is a money pit, and you're wasting your potential serving pancakes. Be practical, Ellie." "Practical," I echoed. "Is that what you call secretly plotting to destroy Grandpa's legacy? His life's work, the place he built from nothing." "I call it being realistic," Mason shot back. "That legacy is falling apart, and you know it. I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone. Everyone except Grandpa, who wants to keep his diner. Everyone except the employees who need their jobs. Everyone except the community that gathers there every day." I stood gathering the inspection report with shaking hands. "I'll find another way." "There is no other way," Mason called as I reached the door. "When you're ready to be reasonable, my offer stands. Think about Grandpa instead of your own nostalgia." That night I sat with Grandpa in his small living room, the weight of my failure heavy between us. I had to tell him about Mason's betrayal about the development plans. "He says he's trying to secure your future," I explained, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Grandpa was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, one strong, one weaker. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "I never taught him the difference between price and value," he said. "That's my failure." He reached for the photo album on the side table, his movements painstaking but determined. Inside were pictures of the diner through the decades, Grandpa and Grandma on opening day, Mason and me as children, perched on counter stools with ice cream, sundaes, community celebrations, and everyday moments captured in fading color. "This," he said, pointing to a photo of himself surrounded by staff and regulars, "is my retirement plan. Always has been." In that moment, I vowed to find a way to save Morgan's Diner, with or without my brother's help. The next morning, I arrived at the diner even earlier than usual, my mind still racing with possible solutions to our financial crisis. As I unlocked the door, the familiar smell of the place, coffee and maple syrup, bacon grease and lemon cleaner, hit me with a wave of determination. This place mattered. It deserved saving. By 7 a.m., the diner was humming with the usual breakfast crowd. I moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders on autopilot, while my mind continued to churn through options. Could we do a fundraiser, take out a second mortgage, sell my car? I was so lost in thought that I nearly spilled coffee when Mayor Johnson's booming voice interrupted my mental calculations. "Earth to Ellie," he said with a chuckle, sliding his empty mug toward me for a refill. "You're a million miles away this morning." Mayor Johnson had been eating breakfast at Morgan's every Tuesday and Thursday for 40 years. He'd started the tradition as a young attorney and continued through his 3 terms as Westridge's mayor. He'd known me since I was in pigtails, helping Grandpa bus tables for quarters. "Sorry, Mayor," I said, filling his cup. "Just distracted." "Anything this old politician can help with?" he asked, stirring in his usual 2 sugars. "You look like you're carrying the weight of Westridge on those shoulders." Something in his kindness cracked my professional veneer. Before I could stop myself, I was telling him about the health inspection, the repairs, Mason's betrayal, and the developers eyeing our property. Horizon Developers Mayor Johnson repeated, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "They've been sniffing around our planning department for months. Had no idea your brother was representing them, though." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Your grandfather built this place when downtown was nearly dead. Did you know that? The mills had closed and businesses were fleeing to the suburbs. Harold Morgan bet against the odds and created not just a restaurant but a community center." I smiled despite my worry. "He tells that story often." "As well he should." The mayor set down his mug firmly. "Mind if I spread the word about your situation? I know some people who might have ideas." By closing time that day, my phone was buzzing with messages from townspeople. Miss Abernathy, my former English teacher, showed up at the diner with a handwritten list of grant programs for historic businesses. Frank Williams, who ran the local construction company and had played high school football with my father, came by to look at the kitchen issues. "The ventilation system isn't as bad as that inspector made out," Frank declared after climbing around in our ceiling. "I can bring it up to code for about a third of that quote. And those floor tiles, highway robbery, what they're charging you." "I can't ask you to work for less than you're worth, Frank," I protested. "Who's asking?" he countered. "I'm offering. My crew needs work during our slow season anyway, and we can schedule it during your off hours. Your grandpa gave my daughter her first job when no one else would hire a kid with purple hair and an attitude." I remember my debt. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Customers would come and order their usual, and then mention some connection to the diner, a first date, a job interview, a family tradition, followed by an offer of help. The hardware store owner promised discounted materials. A retired electrician volunteered to inspect our wiring for free. 3 local restaurants, technically our competitors, offered to lend staff for a fundraising dinner. Rebecca created a Save Morgan social media campaign that quickly gained traction. Tyler designed flyers that local businesses displayed in their windows. Even Denise, usually so practical and unsentimental, organized a bake sale featuring her famous pies. Within a week, we'd raised nearly $5,000 and secured enough donated services and materials to cover about half the needed repairs. It wasn't enough yet, but for the first time since the inspection, I felt hope fluttering in my chest. Grandpa watched it all from his corner booth, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Told you," he said to me, during a quiet moment. Community. One evening, as I was closing up, Miss Abernathy returned with a young woman I didn't recognize. "Ellie, this is my daughter Amanda," she introduced. "She's an attorney specializing in small business and historic preservation." Amanda's handshake was firm, her smile warm but professional. "Mom told me about your situation. I might have some ideas if you'd like to hear them." We sat at a booth while I explained everything in detail, including Mason's involvement with the developers. Amanda took notes occasionally, asking clarifying questions. "Your brother's dual role is concerning," she said when I finished. "If he's representing the developers while also trying to influence your grandfather to sell, there could be ethical issues there, especially if your grandfather isn't being fully informed." She explained that older buildings like ours might qualify for historic preservation status, which could open doors to special funding and tax incentives. Moreover, she suggested researching whether the developers had followed proper procedures in their planning. These big development companies sometimes cut corners in smaller towns, assuming no one has the resources to challenge them, Amanda explained. "I'd be happy to look into this for you, pro bono, of course. I can't accept that I protested." She smiled. "Consider it my small rebellion against corporate law. I turned down a job at a firm like your brother's to work with small businesses and nonprofits. Makes my bank account smaller, but my conscience clearer." That night, as I helped Grandpa get ready for bed, I found myself telling him about a memory from childhood. Mason and I, perhaps 10 and 16 at the time, helping in the diner on a busy Saturday morning. We had worked side by side refilling salt shakers, neither fighting nor competing, just contributing to the family business. He was different then, I said, helping Grandpa button his pajama top. What happened to him? Grandpa's eyes grew distant. I pushed him, he admitted softly. After your grandma died, I saw his intelligence, his ambition. I wanted security for him. Success. He looked at me, regret etching lines around his eyes. I never pushed you the same way. Maybe I should have. No, I said firmly. I found my own way, and I'm exactly where I want to be. The next morning, I arrived at the diner to find Frank and two of his crew already assessing the kitchen floor. The bell above the door jingled merrily as regulars arrived for breakfast, each greeting me by name. Denise was singing in the kitchen as she prepped for the day. Through the front window, I saw Mason's SUV slow as it passed. For once, he didn't stop, and I felt both relief and a strange sadness. When had we become such strangers? I turned back to the warm, bustling diner, a small spark of hope growing despite everything. We weren't saved yet, but we weren't alone either. For the first time, I began to believe we might actually pull this off. The tentative hope that had been building over the past 2 weeks shattered one Tuesday morning when I opened our mail. Among the usual bills and circulars was an official-looking envelope from the Westridge County Tax Assessor's Office. Inside was a property tax bill, nearly double what we'd paid the previous year, along with a notice explaining that our property had been reassessed based on current market values and development potential in the area. I stared at the amount due, $8,700, my hands trembling slightly. We barely had enough set aside for the health inspector's repairs, even with the community's help. This additional expense was impossible. As if the tax bill wasn't enough, Tyler burst through the back door an hour later, his face pale beneath his freckles. "Boss, there's water everywhere in the basement," he reported, breathless. I went down to get more napkins from storage and stepped into an inch of water. The ancient main water line into the building had finally given up, sending water cascading over the basement floor where we stored dry goods and supplies. Everything on the lower shelves was ruined bags of flour, sugar, coffee, all soaked through and unsalvageable. I stood in the flooded basement water, soaking my sneakers, and felt something inside me crumble. The plumber we called delivered the final blow. The entire plumbing system was shot, corroded beyond spot repairs. It needed a complete replacement, another $7,000 we didn't have. That evening after closing, I called an emergency meeting with our small staff. Denise, Tyler, and Rebecca sat around a table in the empty diner, faces solemn as I laid out our financial reality. Even with the fundraising and donated services, we're looking at nearly $16, 0 inches repairs, plus the increased tax bill, I concluded. I've gone through our books a dozen times, and I just don't see how we can make it work. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Maybe we could take out a loan, Rebecca suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. We all knew the banks had already turned us down. Or raise prices, Tyler offered. Denise shook her head. We'd have to double them to make a dent. We'd lose half our customers. I took a deep breath. I need to be honest with you all. We might have to close, at least temporarily. The words felt like betrayal in my mouth. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. This job was her lifeline as a single mother. Tyler stared at his hands, no doubt mentally calculating how many semesters of community college this would delay. Denise, who had worked here longer than I'd been alive, simply looked tired. "Let me talk to my cousin in Cleveland," Denise finally said. "He might be able to loan me a little something. I've got some savings too." "Me too," said Tyler, though we all knew a 19-year-old dishwasher's savings couldn't amount to much. Their willingness to offer what little they had broke something inside me. "No," I said firmly. "I won't take your personal money. We'll figure something out." After they left, I sat with Grandpa in his usual booth. The diner felt eerily quiet, without the usual clatter of dishes and hum of conversation. "I think Mason might be right," Grandpa said, suddenly his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time to sell." I stared at him, shocked. "You don't mean that?" He looked around the empty diner, his eyes lingering on the photos on the wall, the counter where he'd spent most of his adult life. "This place has been my world for 50 years. But maybe that's selfish now. You deserve a life too, Ellie. A future." He pulled an old shoebox from beside him. I hadn't noticed it before. Inside were photos I'd never seen Grandpa and Grandma young and laughing on opening day. My father as a teenager working behind the counter. Mason and me as children sitting on these very same vinyl booths. "I'm proud of what we built here," Grandpa said, his voice steadier now. "But buildings fall apart, businesses end. It's family that matters in the end." I felt tears threatening. "The diner is family too." "Yes," he agreed, patting my hand. "But maybe its time has come like mine is coming. Maybe Mason's offer is a kind of mercy." I couldn't bear to see my proud grandfather so defeated. I promised to think about it, then drove him home in silence, my mind racing with increasingly desperate ideas. The next morning, I overheard two regulars discussing the property reassessment. "Funny how all the downtown properties got hit right when those developers showed up," one commented. "My cousin works at the assessor's office," the other replied. "Says some fancy law firm has been pushing for updated valuations of this whole block. Real coincidence, huh?" A sick feeling washed over me. That evening, I drove to the county records office and requested documents related to our reassessment. The clerk, a former high school classmate, looked both ways before leaning in. "There's been a lot of activity around downtown properties lately," she whispered. "Requests for information pressure for reassessments. All coming from the same place." She slid a document toward me with the law firm's letterhead clearly visible: Harrington and Bell, Mason's firm. The betrayal burned like acid. Mason hadn't just been waiting for the diner to fail naturally. He'd been actively working to ensure it happened. When I confronted him at his house that evening, he didn't even have the decency to deny it. "It's business, Ellie," he said, leaning against his marble kitchen counter, scotch in hand. "The development is happening whether you like it or not. I'm just ensuring Grandpa gets the best possible deal when it does." By orchestrating a tax increase that might force us to close, I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "How is that helping him?" "Sometimes people need a push to do what's best for them," Mason replied coolly. "That diner is bleeding money, and you're bleeding your future away with it. The sooner you both accept reality, the better off everyone will be. The reality is that you're sabotaging your own family for what a commission partner's status." A flicker of something guilt perhaps crossed his face before the professional mask returned. "I'm offering a solution. $800,000 for a property that's falling apart. Grandpa could live comfortably. You could finish your education, start a real career. And the developers get prime downtown real estate for a fraction of what it will be worth after they build their complex," I countered. "While the heart of this town gets ripped out and replaced with chain stores." Mason sighed, setting down his glass. "This isn't a Hallmark movie, Ellie. Towns change, businesses close, smart people adapt. And family," I asked quietly. "Does that change too? Do we just adapt when someone betrays us?" He didn't answer, and I left with the weight of defeat pressing down on me. Back at the diner, I sat in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of 50 years of memories. The enormity of our situation crashed over me in waves. The health violations, the plumbing disaster, the tax increase, Mason's betrayal, Grandpa's resignation. For the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to cry great heaving sobs that echoed in the empty restaurant. I cried for the diner, for Grandpa's legacy, for the community that gathered here, for my own deferred dreams, and yes, even for the brother I felt I'd lost long before this betrayal. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollow but somehow lighter. Maybe this was acceptance. Maybe it was time to admit defeat with dignity. I was about to lock up when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't give up yet. Found something you should see. Meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. Amanda Abernathy, Esquire." A tiny spark of hope flickered back to life. The fragile hope that Amanda's message had kindled was extinguished the next morning when my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was the hospital. Grandpa had suffered another stroke during the night. His caregiver had found him unresponsive and called an ambulance. I raced to Westridge General, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The emergency room was harshly lit and smelled of antiseptic and fear. A nurse directed me to a curtained cubicle where Grandpa lay small and pale against white sheets, machines beeping steadily around him. "The stroke appears to be less severe than his previous one," Dr. Patel explained after examining him. "But at his age, any cerebrovascular event is serious. We'll need to run more tests, keep him for observation." I nodded, numbly clutching Grandpa's hand. His eyes fluttered open briefly, struggling to focus on my face. Diner, he managed to say the word slurred but recognizable. Don't worry about the diner, I assured him. Just focus on getting better. His fingers tightened weakly around mine before his eyes drifted closed again. I called Denise from the hallway, explaining the situation. Can you handle opening? I'll be at the hospital all day. Don't you worry about a thing, she promised. Just take care of Harold. The diner will manage without you for a day. But as the days stretched into a week, it became clear that the diner couldn't manage indefinitely. Without me there to oversee everything, small problems multiplied. A delivery was missed. A regular's birthday celebration was forgotten. The ancient cash register began malfunctioning. Each night, I'd arrive after hospital visiting hours to find longer lists of issues waiting for my attention. Meanwhile, Grandpa's recovery proceeded in frustrating inches rather than yards. His speech was more affected this time, and the doctors were concerned about his cognitive function. Physical therapy would be essential, they said, followed by skilled nursing care expenses his Medicare would only partially cover. I sat by his hospital bed one evening, staring at the mounting medical bills alongside printouts of the diner's increasingly dire finances. The numbers refused to add up to anything but disaster. Miss Morgan. I looked up to see a hospital social worker standing in the doorway. I'm Sarah Chen from Patient Services, she introduced herself. I'd like to discuss your grandfather's discharge planning and ongoing care needs. Over the next hour, Miss Chen gently but thoroughly explained the reality of Grandpa's situation. He would need significant rehabilitation, possibly followed by long-term care if his recovery plateaued. The costs were staggering, even with insurance. Have you considered applying for Medicaid to supplement his Medicare? She asked. We've looked into it, I admitted. But he owns a business property that puts his assets above the threshold. She nodded sympathetically. That's a common challenge. Sometimes families need to make difficult decisions about assets. The implication was clear. Selling the diner might be Grandpa's best hope for affording the care he needed. As if the universe were determined to eliminate any remaining options, I returned to my apartment that night to find a legal notice that had been delivered by courier. Mason had filed a petition for conservatorship over Grandpa, claiming that his diminished capacity made him unable to make sound financial decisions. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. If granted, Mason would gain legal control over all of Grandpa's affairs, including the power to sell the diner without my consent. The next morning, I canceled my meeting with Amanda and went straight to the hospital to confront Mason, who was there for what he'd described to the nurses as a brotherly visit. I found him sitting beside Grandpa's sleeping form, scrolling through his phone. Conservatorship, I hissed, keeping my voice low to avoid disturbing Grandpa. Have you lost your mind? Mason pocketed his phone and stepped into the hallway, gesturing for me to follow. It's for his own good, he said, his voice maddeningly reasonable. He's clearly not capable of making major financial decisions in his condition. And you are, I demanded. You who've been plotting behind his back for months? I'm a lawyer with financial acumen, making an objective assessment, Mason countered. You're an emotional waitress clinging to a failing business at the expense of his health care. The cruelty of his words stole my breath. I'm his granddaughter trying to protect his life's work and dignity. His dignity will be better served in a quality care facility than being dependent on you while his business crumbles around him, Mason said. The development offer expires in 30 days. After that, the value of that property drops significantly. This is his chance, your chance for financial security. He doesn't want to sell, I insisted. Mason's expression hardened. He's not capable of knowing what he wants anymore. That's the entire point. I'll fight you in court, I warned. With what resources, he asked, eyebrow raised. What lawyer can you afford who stands a chance against our firm? Be sensible, Ellie. This is happening. The only question is whether you make it easier or harder on everyone, including Grandpa. He left me standing in the sterile hospital hallway, trembling with rage and fear. That afternoon, I visited Grandpa during his physical therapy session. The therapist was patiently working with him on grasping objects with his affected hand. His frustration was evident in the tightness around his eyes, but he kept trying. Mason came by, I said, when the therapist stepped away momentarily. Grandpa's eyes found mine, a question in them. He's filed for conservatorship, I explained gently. He wants legal control over your affairs, including the diner. Understanding darkened his face. He struggled to speak the words coming haltingly. No. Sell. Not his. I know, I assured him. I'm going to fight it, but I need to know what you want. Truly want. The diner needs major repairs. Your medical bills are piling up. If you want to sell, I'll understand. He reached for my hand with effort, his grip weak but determined. My life's work, he managed. Your future. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know if I can win against Mason, I admitted. He has resources, legal knowledge. All I have is a half-failing diner and an English degree. Grandpa squeezed my hand again, his gaze intense. Stronger. Then, you know. That evening, I sat alone in the closed diner, the court papers spread before me. The hearing was scheduled for June 15th, just 2 weeks away. I would need to find a lawyer, gather evidence of Grandpa's competence, and somehow prepare to face down my brother and his prestigious firm. The task felt impossible. I had no legal knowledge, limited funds, and was already stretched thin between the hospital, the diner, and simply trying to keep myself functional on too little sleep and too much stress. For a moment, surrender beckoned. Would it really be so terrible to let Mason win, to accept the developer's offer, pay for Grandpa's care, perhaps finally use my degree? The weight of fighting seemed suddenly too much to bear. I rested my head on the cool surface of the table, exhaustion washing over me in waves. The diner creaked and settled around me, a living entity that had witnessed 50 years of life's moments, celebrations, and sorrows, beginnings and endings, ordinary days and extraordinary ones. Was I really ready to let it die? A sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. Through the glass, I could see Miss Abernathy's concerned face. I unlocked the door to let her in. "Amanda told me you missed your meeting," she said, without preamble. Then I heard about Harold. "How are you holding up, dear?" The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid me. "Not great," I admitted. She nodded unsurprised. "Amanda did some digging anyway. She thought you should see what she found." She placed a folder on the table beside the court papers. Inside were documents showing that Mason's firm had begun the process of acquiring options on several properties surrounding the diner, not just ours, 6 months ago. There were emails between Mason and the developers discussing the Morgan property obstacle and strategies to incentivize the sale, including the tax reassessment. Most damning was an internal memo outlining Mason's personal financial interest in the development, a partnership stake worth potentially millions if the project proceeded as planned. "This is a clear conflict of interest," Miss Abernathy explained, "especially in a conservatorship case. Amanda says he should have disclosed these connections to the court." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair, a spark of righteous anger and determination. Mason wasn't just trying to help Grandpa or even make a smart business decision. He stood to personally profit enormously from the diner's demise. "What do I do with this?" I asked. "Amanda is waiting at her office," Miss Abernathy replied. "She thinks you have a case not just to fight the conservatorship, but possibly for other legal actions as well." I gathered the papers with suddenly steady hands. "Let's go." As I locked the diner door behind us, I glanced back at the neon Morgan sign glowing warmly in the window. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Amanda's office was nothing like Mason's sleek corporate space. Located above the local bookstore, it was small but welcoming, with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together and walls lined with framed community awards rather than law degrees, though those were present too, tucked modestly in a corner. "Sorry about missing our meeting," I said as I sank into a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Family emergencies take priority," Amanda replied, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. Mom filled me in. "How's your grandfather?" "Stable," I said. "Determined." "Afraid." I hesitated, then added, "like me." Amanda nodded, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Well, let's see if we can address the afraid part. I've been doing some digging into your situation, and there's definitely more going on than a simple family disagreement over a property." She spread several documents across her desk, pointing out, highlighting, and notations she'd made. "Your brother has a serious ethical problem here. He's representing the developers professionally, while personally standing to gain from the development, all while seeking conservatorship over your grandfather, without disclosing these conflicts to the court. Can that stop the conservatorship?" I asked, hope flickering. "It certainly gives us strong grounds to challenge it," Amanda confirmed. "But there's more. The way the tax reassessment was pushed through raises questions about undue influence. And I found something else interesting." She pulled out an old, leather-bound book. the County Historical Society has been documenting buildings in the original downtown district. Morgan's Diner qualifies for historical designation, which would make it much harder to demolish for development. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strategy forming. What do we do first? We need your grandfather's clear wishes documented, Amanda said. I'll visit him in the hospital tomorrow with a colleague as witness. Then we prepare for the hearing, gathering evidence of his competence, documenting the conflicts of interest, and filing our own petition for temporary guardianship limited to medical decisions, only leaving his business affairs under his control with your assistance. And the diner's problems, I asked, reality intruding. Even if we win, we still have the health violations, plumbing issues, and tax bill. One battle at a time, Amanda advised. Let's secure your grandfather's rights first. The rest we'll tackle afterward. Over the next few days, a war room of sorts formed in the diner after closing hours. Amanda worked on the legal strategy while her paralegal researched precedents. Mayor Johnson made calls to contacts at the county level about the suspicious tax reassessment. Miss Abernathy organized community members to attend the hearing as character witnesses for Grandpa. Frank Williams stopped by with surprising news. I've been looking at those plumbing issues, he said. Found something interesting. That main line that failed, it's not actually your responsibility, it's the city's. It crosses under the property line. I've already filed the documentation with the Public Works Department. They're sending a crew next week. Small victories accumulated. The health inspector granted us an extension based on the documented progress we'd already made. The Historical Society fast-tracked our application for historic designation. Denise's church took up a collection that covered a month's worth of Grandpa's medical expenses not covered by insurance. But the most unexpected development came on a rainy Tuesday when I was visiting Grandpa. His speech therapy was showing results, and though he still struggled with longer sentences, his comprehension and determination were undiminished. Diary, he said, gesturing toward the small overnight bag I'd packed for him. Bottom. Puzzled, I searched the bag and found a small, worn book I'd never seen before tucked into the lining. It was my grandmother's diary from 50 years ago. That evening, I read it cover to cover, tears streaming down my face as my grandmother's voice emerged from the pages telling the true story of Morgan's Diner. It hadn't been Grandpa's business venture initially, as family lore suggested. It had been a partnership between them, her recipes, his business sense. They'd mortgaged everything they owned, worked 18-hour days, and nearly failed a dozen times that first year. The diary detailed their struggles, hopes, and the promise they'd made to each other. The diner would be their legacy to both their grandchildren, a reminder of what could be built through hard work and determination. The final pages included letters my grandmother had written to Mason and me before her death, intended to be shared when the diner eventually passed to us. She'd seen in both of us qualities that would complement each other in running the family business. Mason's head for numbers, and my heart for people. The diner was meant for both of us, I whispered to the empty room. Not to sell, to share. Armed with new resolve, I threw myself into preparations for the hearing. Amanda helped me organize financial projections, showing how the diner could become profitable again with the right investments. Frank provided documentation of the repairs that were the city's responsibility. The health inspector submitted a letter confirming our compliance plan. Meanwhile, Grandpa continued to improve. His doctors noted his determination in therapy and his clear communication regarding his wishes for both his care and his business. They agreed to testify to his competence at the hearing. The evening before the court date, I was closing up when Mason's SUV pulled into the lot. My stomach tightened as he approached the door. I considered ignoring him, but instead unlocked it, standing firmly in the doorway. "Come to threaten me again?" I asked. He looked uncharacteristically unsettled. "Can I come in, please?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Mason stood awkwardly in the middle of the diner, his expensive suit out of place among the worn red vinyl booths. For once, he wasn't checking his phone or projecting confidence. "I heard you've retained legal counsel," he began, "and that you've been gathering quite a bit of documentation." "Amanda Abernathy," I confirmed. "She's very thorough." He nodded, a flash of respect crossing his features. "The firm is concerned about potential ethics complaints." "They should be." Mason cleared his throat. "They've suggested I withdraw the conservatorship petition." As a show of good faith, I stared at him, suspicious. Just like that, there would be conditions, he admitted. A reasonable timeline for bringing the diner up to code. considerations for Grandpa's medical care, perhaps a compromise on the property, selling a portion for development while maintaining the original diner footprint. I crossed my arms. Why the sudden willingness to compromise? Your developers want all or nothing. Something shifted in Mason's expression, a crack in the polished facade. The developments want to avoid negative publicity, and the firm is concerned about my judgment in the matter. Translation: Mason was in trouble with his bosses. The conflict of interest Amanda had uncovered had put his precious career at risk. What about you? I pressed. What do you want, Mason? Not the firm, not the developers. You. He looked away, his gaze catching on the wall of photos, 50 years of Morgan family history. I don't know anymore, he admitted quietly. I thought this was the smart play, the practical solution. For who? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, did you know Grandma left me letters about the diner? About running it someday? I found her diary, I said. It was meant for both of us, Mason. Not to sell, to continue. He nodded slowly. I told myself I was too busy, too important for a small-town diner, that I was doing everyone a favor by turning it into something more valuable. More valuable to who? He met my eyes then, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. My brother, not the lawyer, not the success story, but the boy who'd once helped me with my homework and taught me to ride a bike. I'll withdraw the petition, he said finally. No conditions. It's Grandpa's decision, and yours. Relief flooded through me, but caution held it in check. And the developers? I'll recuse myself from representing them, he said. It's the ethical thing to do. It wasn't a full surrender. The developers would find another lawyer. The pressure to sell would continue, but it was a start, a crack in the wall between us. Thank you, I said simply. Mason nodded, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, you're doing a better job with this place than I probably would have. It wasn't an apology, not really, but coming from Mason, it was something close. After he left, I called Amanda with the news. She was cautiously optimistic, but insisted we proceed with our preparations anyway, just in case. Trust, but verify, she advised. The next morning, I received official notification that the conservatorship petition had been withdrawn. The immediate threat had passed, but the diner's problems remained. We still needed to complete the repairs. Pay the tax bill, though. Mayor Johnson was making progress on challenging the reassessment and find a sustainable path forward. But something had shifted inside me. I was no longer fighting just to keep Grandpa's dream alive. I was fighting for my own place in that dream, for the future I suddenly could envision clearly. When I told Grandpa about Mason withdrawing, the petition relief softened his face. Brothers and sisters, he said, the words coming easier now with therapy, should stand together, not apart. We're working on it, I promised, one step at a time. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Westridge Community College. They were looking for an adjunct professor to teach 2 evening classes in English composition starting next semester. The hours would work around the diner's schedule. It wasn't a full-time teaching position, but it was a start, a way to use my degree while keeping my commitment to Grandpa and the diner. As I cleaned tables that evening, watching the sunset paint the diner in warm golden light, I realized I was humming something I hadn't done in months. The challenges ahead remained daunting, but for the first time, I could see a path through them, one day at a time, one problem solved after another. The bell above the door jingled, and Frank entered with blueprints tucked under his arm. Got some ideas for restructuring that back storage area, he announced. Might give you the space for those cooking classes Denise has been talking about. I smiled, making room for the blueprints on the counter. Let's see what you've got. The diner wasn't just surviving anymore, it was evolving. And so was I. 6 months have passed since that dramatic week when we almost lost everything. Morgan's Diner still stands at the corner of Main and Maple, though you might not recognize it at first glance. The chrome exterior has been polished to a mirror, shine the neon sign restored to its original 1973 glory. Inside, the black and white checkered floor gleams under new lighting that somehow manages to feel both modern and vintage at the same time. We held a grand reopening celebration last weekend to mark both the diner's renovation and its 50th anniversary. The line stretched down the block, not just regular customers, but people from neighboring towns who'd heard about the little diner that fought back. Mayor Johnson cut a ceremonial ribbon and local news stations covered the event. I barely recognized the confident woman being interviewed on the evening news as myself. Grandpa sat in his usual booth, now officially designated with a small brass plaque reading the founder's table. His recovery has been remarkable, not complete but substantial. He still uses a cane, and some words still elude him, but his wit remains sharp as ever. The nurses at the rehabilitation center claim his determination set records, though I suspect it had more to do with his insistence on being present for the reopening. Not missing my own party, he'd declared practicing his walking daily, until he could make it from the car to his booth without assistance. The renovations weren't just cosmetic. Frank and his crew replaced the ancient plumbing after the city fixed their portion, updated the electrical system, and installed a new ventilation hood that the health inspector actually complimented during his follow-up visit. We added a small coffee bar in what used to be unused storage space, selling specialty drinks alongside our traditional bottomless diner coffee. The funding came together in ways I never could have imagined. The Historical Society's designation unlocked grant money for facade restoration. A local credit union approved a small business loan once Amanda helped us restructure our finances. The tax reassessment was successfully challenged and adjusted to a reasonable increase phased in over 5 years. And there was one contribution that arrived anonymously, a cashier's check for $15,000, just enough to cover the remaining repair costs. No name, no note. But I recognized the bank it was drawn on, the same one Mason uses for his personal accounts. We haven't spoken much about it. Some wounds heal slowly, if at all. But he stops by the diner occasionally now, usually early mornings before court or late evenings after depositions. He orders coffee, sometimes pie, and we exchange cautious pleasantries that have gradually evolved into actual conversations. Last week, he mentioned that he'd left Harrington and Bell to start his own practice. Smaller firm, more community-focused, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Less corporate work, more family law, and small business representation. Sounds like a good fit, I offered, and meant it. The community college classes have been a revelation. 3 evenings a week, I transform from diner manager to Professor Morgan teaching English composition to adults returning to education and teenagers seeking their future. The satisfaction of helping students find their voice through words fills a part of me that the diner, for all its rewards, doesn't quite reach. Some mornings are still overwhelming. I wake at 4:30 a.m., help Grandpa with his exercises, open the diner, manage the breakfast rush, grade papers during the afternoon lull, and sometimes don't make it to bed until midnight after closing and prep for the next day's classes. But it no longer feels like drowning, more like swimming with purpose, each stroke bringing me closer to a shore I can now clearly see. Denise has taken on more responsibility in the kitchen, training Tyler as her assistant when he's not at his community college classes. He's studying culinary arts, now inspired by her mentorship. Rebecca manages the front of house 2 days a week, allowing me time for lesson planning and administrative work. Her daughter occasionally does homework in the corner booth, already absorbing the diner's legacy into her own story. The developers haven't given up entirely. A scaled-back version of Westridge Commons is being built 3 blocks away on land that was already vacant. They approached us again last month with a new offer, not to buy the property, but to discuss a potential partnership where Morgan's would be featured as the authentic local experience anchor for their otherwise chain-dominated food court. Grandpa and I are considering it, not because we need their validation or their money, but because we're strong enough now to engage on our own terms. The diner isn't just surviving. It's thriving. This morning, as I wiped down the counter before opening, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished chrome. I barely recognized myself from a year ago. The shadows under my eyes have faded, replaced by laugh lines at the corners. My shoulders no longer hunch under invisible weight, but stand straight with hard-earned confidence. Grandpa shuffled in from the back, moving slowly but purposefully to his booth. Beautiful morning, he observed, looking out at the sunrise, painting the street golden. It is, I agreed, pouring his coffee. He sipped it appreciatively before fixing me with a knowing gaze. You're happy now. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I am. Are you? He gestured around the diner to the gleaming surfaces, the photos on the walls, the history and future, mingled in every corner. Built something that lasts, he said simply. That's happiness. As customers began trickling in for the morning rush, I tied on my apron, not the faded one from a year ago, but a crisp new one with Morgan's Diner Est, 1973, embroidered across the front. The weight of it felt right like armor for a battle I'd already won. Mason's SUV glided past the window, slowing as it always did. But instead of continuing on, it pulled into a parking space. A moment later, the bell jingled as he entered dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual suit. "Got time for breakfast with your brother?" he asked, a tentative smile softening his once sharp features. I gestured to an empty booth, not Grandpa's, but one with a good view of both the street and the kitchen. Always. As I poured his coffee, I glanced around at the diner full of morning regulars at Grandpa, holding court in his corner at the staff, moving efficiently between tasks. The path that had once seemed like a detour had become my destination. Not a compromise or a sacrifice, but a choice I'd make again. Success comes in many forms. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and drives a luxury SUV. Sometimes it ties on an apron at dawn and serves pancakes to people who know your name. Sometimes it's simply building something that lasts, whether a business, a family, or a bridge between the two. I'd like to hear from you now. Have you ever had to choose between what society defines as success and what your heart knows is right? Did you face criticism or doubt from those who didn't understand your path? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories, and share with someone who might need this reminder. True success isn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the lives we touch and the legacy we build. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Our diner's doors are always open, just like my heart is to your stories.